They called the ship the Olive Branch, a name picked with so much care, so much hope. The humans who built it didn't want war. They wanted peace. They dreamed of shaking hands with the ancient races of the galaxy, of trading, learning, and finally taking their place beside beings who had navigated the stars for millennia before we even looked at the moon. Standing at the observation window, Ambassador Elena Vasquez watched the star streaks blur by. At 43, she had streaks of gray in her dark hair and fine lines around her eyes from a lifetime of smiling. She had poured 20 years of her life into this one moment, learning alien languages, studying their cultures, and holding on to the belief that humanity deserved a seat at the galactic table. Behind her, the ship was a living, breathing world. 2,000 souls called the Olive Branch home. It was a floating city of scientists, diplomats, and families with children. Down on Deck 7, you could hear kids reciting the histories of alien worlds in a little schoolroom. Up on Deck 12, a garden bloomed with flowers from Earth, thriving under artificial suns. This ship was filled with love and hope. "Ambassador," Captain David Chen said, coming to her side, "we're entering conquered space. The beacon is broadcasting our peaceful intentions on all frequencies." Elena gave a slow nod. "How long until we reach the council station?" 6 hours. 6 hours until humanity would finally meet the legendary Concord Council. 6 hours until they would stand before the 7 elder races and humbly ask for the right to be seen as equals. Elena had gone over her speech 1,000 times. She knew every word, every respectful nod, every carefully planned pause. What she didn't know was that she would never get the chance to say a single word of it. Light years away, in a grand chamber made of crystal and pure light, the Concord Council watched the tiny human ship get closer. The chamber was ancient, 10,000 years old, and for every one of those years the Council had ruled the galaxy with absolute authority. They had watched species rise and civilizations turn to dust. They were gods in everything but name. The Vithrani hierarch sat at the very center of it all. His body was literally made of living crystal, stunningly beautiful and impossibly cold. Light didn't just reflect off him. It passed right through, scattering into 1,000 tiny rainbows. But his eyes were empty of any warmth. He had lived for 3,000 years, and in all that time he'd come to see every other species as nothing more than insects. Sometimes useful, often annoying, but never, ever equal. "The humans are requesting an audience," rumbled the Korath High Commander. He was a colossal creature, covered from head to toe in scales the color of dried blood. His people were the muscle of the Concord, warriors who found the same joy in violence that others found in art. "I am aware," the hierarch's voice chimed, like ice in a crystal glass. "I have read their message. They want to trade. They want to be recognized. They want," he finished, "to be our equals." A wave of laughter, cold and cruel, echoed through the chamber. "They've barely existed for a blink," hissed the Nethys observer, a being made of shifting shadows and whispers. "Their entire history is a heartbeat. They slaughter each other over nothing. They've poisoned their own world. And now they dare to approach us? They are vermin," the Korath commander agreed with a snarl. "Vermin that have already infested 12 worlds. If we let them keep going, they'll spread even further. These humans breed fast. They adapt. They're disgustingly persistent. The hierarch thought about that, his cold eyes fixed on the holographic image of the olive branch. Such a small, fragile-looking ship. They had named their vessel after a plant, a symbol of peace from their primitive little world. It was almost cute in its stupidity. "We should send a message," the hierarch said, his voice slow and deliberate. "A message not just for the humans, but for any lesser species that might get ideas. This galaxy belongs to the elder races. It always has, and it always will." "What kind of message did you have in mind?" the observer whispered. A thin, sharp smile crossed the hierarch's crystal face. "Destroy the ship, burn it all, and broadcast the destruction on every channel. Let the entire galaxy see what happens to vermin that try to climb too high." There was a brief, silent pause. Then, one by one, every member of the council nodded. It wasn't a hard choice for them. 2,000 lives were less than nothing. Humanity was less than nothing. This was just taking out the trash. Aboard the Olive Branch, Elena was in her quarters, going over her notes one last time when the first alarm blared. She looked up, confused. They had done everything by the book, followed every single protocol. "Ambassador," Captain Chen's voice crackled over the intercom, tight with panic. "Get to the bridge, now!" The hallways were already jammed with people, their faces etched with confusion. A child was crying somewhere down the hall. Elena shoved her way through the crowd and burst onto the bridge. The sight on the main view screen made her blood run cold. Warships, hundreds of them. Korath warships, surrounding the Olive Branch like a pack of wolves cornering a lamb, their weapon ports already glowing with a sick, deadly light. "They're not answering our hails," Chen said, his face ghostly pale. "They're just sitting there, waiting." "Waiting for what?" Elena whispered. The answer came a second later, as a transmission forced its way onto every screen on the ship. The crystalline face of the Thrani hierarch stared out at them, completely devoid of emotion. "You are humans," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You are nothing. You came here looking for recognition. Instead, you will get a lesson. Your species will learn its place as you watch us wipe your pathetic ship from existence. And you will finally understand," he continued, "that the galaxy has no room for vermin." Elena stumbled forward. "Please," she begged. "We came in peace. There are children on this ship, families. We don't mean you any harm." The hierarch tilted his head, a gesture of mild curiosity. "There are insects in my garden. They mean no harm either. I still crush them." The transmission cut out. "Full power to the engines!" Chen screamed. "Get us out of here!" But the Olive Branch was a ship of peace, not a warship. It was built for hope, not speed. And in that terrifying moment, hope wasn't nearly enough. The Korath ships opened fire. Back on Earth, President Mohammed Chen watched the live feed in his office. Just as promised, the Council was broadcasting the slaughter to the entire galaxy. They wanted everyone to watch. They wanted everyone to learn their lesson. Mohammed watched the Olive Branch get torn apart. He watched as escape pods launched, only to be hunted down and vaporized one by one. He watched 2,000 people die in silent, fiery agony. And among them was his daughter, Sarah. She was only 24. She had begged to join the mission as a junior diplomat because she believed in peace, in the fundamental goodness of the universe. She truly believed that if humanity just reached out with open hands, they would be met with friendship. The very last image on the screen was of the olive branch cracking in two, spilling its contents into the void. Then there was just empty space where a dream used to be. For a long, long time, Mohammed just sat there, completely silent. His advisors were talking, shouting, but he couldn't hear a word. His world had shrunk to a single, burning point of pain. His heart had turned to stone. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, calm, and absolutely terrifying. "Get me every military commander, every top scientist, every leader from every colony. Get them all, now." Within hours, the most powerful people in human history were gathered in a secret bunker deep beneath the Antarctic ice. They had all seen the broadcast. They had all witnessed the massacre. Some had lost family. Others had lost friends. Every single one of them had lost their innocence. Mohammed stood before them, his face a mask of stone. He wasn't crying. His voice didn't shake. He wasn't their president anymore. He was something much older, much darker. He was a father who had been forced to watch his child burn. "They think we're vermin," he said softly. "They think we'll scurry back into our holes and hide. They think we've learned our place." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "They are wrong." He looked out at the faces before him, men and women from every nation, every culture. For thousands of years, they had fought one another. But in that moment, they were no longer divided. They were one people, forged into a single weapon by the fires of their shared loss. "We won't strike back tomorrow," Mohammed continued, "or next year. We're going to take our time. We will learn their ways. We will build our strength. We will become a nightmare they can't even imagine. And when we are ready, we will teach them a lesson that they will never, ever forget." He turned to the large screen behind him. Two words appeared in burning gold letters, a phrase that would be carved into the heart of every human for the next 5 years. "Remember, Carthage." The room was dead silent. Then, as one, every single person rose to their feet. They didn't cheer. They didn't shout. They just stood there in a terrible, unified silence and made a vow. The Council had wanted to send the galaxy a message, and they had succeeded, far beyond their wildest dreams. The message they sent was this: humanity remembers. Humanity waits. And humanity never, ever forgives. In the cold, dark void where the olive branch had once been, the debris of a broken dream drifted aimlessly. A child's toy, a faded photograph, a single wilted flower from the garden on Deck 12. These were the last remnants of hope, and they were the seeds of a darkness the galaxy had never known. The elder races didn't know it yet, but the moment they spilled human blood, they had signed their own death warrant. They just hadn't learned how to read the signature. 5 years passed in silence. To the conquered Council, humanity was a distant, unpleasant memory. And why would they think otherwise? Humans were insignificant, a minor race teetering on the edge of civilized space. Crushing their peace offering, the ship named Olive Branch had done its job. The vermin had learned their lesson, scurrying back to their little home worlds to lick their wounds. The elder races went back to their lives of luxury without a second thought. The Thrani resumed their vile slave trade, buying and selling lesser species like cattle. Their dazzling crystal cities, built on the suffering of those they deemed worthless, stretched even higher. The hierarch threw lavish parties, showing off his collection of rare creatures trapped in cages of pure light. The Korath, meanwhile, just kept expanding their mining operations. They would strip entire planets, leaving behind nothing but barren rock and dust. If a world was inhabited, the Korath didn't care. The natives either toiled in the mines until they died, or they were wiped out on day one. The scales of the Korath were permanently stained with the blood of others, and the rest of the elder races were just as bad. The Nethys were spies and blackmailers trading in secrets. The Meldari performed horrific experiments on any being they could capture. The Thrall burned whole ecosystems just to power their fleets. It was a cruel galaxy, and the council that ruled it saw absolutely nothing wrong. But out in the silent darkness between the stars, humanity was becoming something new. Commander Yuki Tanaka stood on the observation deck of Forge Station 7, watching the construction drones weave through the black. She was 40 years old now. Her hair was cut military short, and her eyes had a cold hardness that wasn't there 5 years ago. 5 years ago, she was a wife, dreaming of exploring the stars with the woman she loved. Now, she was something else. Her wife, May, had been a botanist on the Olive Branch. She was in charge of the garden on Deck 12. She spent her days surrounded by flowers and vegetables, dreaming of the day humans would plant gardens on alien soil. May believed in peace. She believed in beauty, and she died believing in those things. Yuki was going to make damn sure she was the last human to ever die for such foolish dreams. "Commander," said Lieutenant Park, walking up with a datapad. "The Nemesis is finished. All systems are green." Yuki stared at the ship taking form in the massive construction bay. It was a monster, blacker than space itself, a ship built not for discovery or defense, but for one thing and one thing only: annihilation, pure, total annihilation. "What's our final count?" she asked, her voice low. 742 capital ships, 12,000 support vessels, and the weapons. Park paused for a second. "The weapons are unlike anything the Council has ever imagined." Yuki gave a sharp nod. 5 years. 5 years of every human scientist, every engineer, every single brilliant mind focused on a single, terrible goal. They had reverse-engineered conquered technology, taking it apart screw by screw. They figured out how it worked, and then they made it better. The elder races had thousands of years of comfort and arrogance behind them. They'd stopped trying to improve. Why fix what already works, right? They were the undisputed masters of the galaxy. No one could challenge them. So they got lazy. Their technology was ancient, stagnant. But humans were never lazy. Humans are never satisfied. Humans looked at an alien plasma cannon and asked, "How can we make this even more destructive?" They looked at an alien energy shield and asked, "How do we shatter this?" They looked at an alien warship and asked, "How can we tear this apart faster?" The answers to those questions were now floating in construction bays across 12 different worlds. The ultimate answer was the Nemesis fleet. On Earth, President Chen spoke before the unified government of humanity. There were no countries anymore, no flags, no borders. The massacre of the Olive Branch had done what millennia of war never could. It had united all of humanity with a single purpose. Today marks the 5th anniversary of the Olive Branch, Chen said. his voice steady and calm. 5 years ago, we lost 2,000 innocent souls. 5 years ago, the Council dismissed us as vermin. 5 years ago, we made them a promise. He stopped, and the chamber was dead silent. Every human watching knew what was coming. That promise is about to be kept. All across human-controlled space, the final preparations were underway. Children who were 8 when the olive branch was destroyed were now 13. They grew up memorizing the names of the dead. They grew up knowing that somewhere out there, alien beings had murdered their people and laughed as they did it. They grew up with a cold hatred burning in their hearts. But it wasn't a wild, reckless fire. It was a patient, methodical, calculated hatred. Human hatred was a blade that could be sharpened over generations, and 5 years had given it a razor's edge. At a training center on Mars, young soldiers practiced combat drills against holograms of Korath warriors. Their instructor, a scarred old veteran named Jackson, watched them with a grim look of approval. "Remember," he told them, his voice gravelly, "we are not fighting a war. Wars have rules. Wars have mercy. Wars can end in surrender." He shook his head slowly. "This is not a war. This is an execution. The Council signed their own death warrant when they destroyed the olive branch. We are just here to carry out the sentence." The soldiers nodded in unison. They understood. They had been taught to understand this from the moment they were old enough to hold a rifle. The Council wasn't an enemy to be defeated. They were a plague to be wiped out. In a lab on Titan, Dr. Sarah Kim reviewed the latest weapon schematics. It was a thing of elegant horror, a tailored virus that could target specific alien DNA, a bomb that could crack a planet's crust wide open, a field that could disable all technology within 1,000 kilometers. Human scientists had gotten terrifyingly creative. "Is this really necessary?" her young assistant asked, his eyes wide with fear as he looked at the plans. These are weapons of genocide." Dr. Kim looked at him, her face a mask. She was 60 years old. She had lost everyone on the olive branch, her parents, her sister, and her niece, who was just 7 years old. "What did the Council do to us?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. They killed our people." "They did more than kill them," she corrected. "They broadcast it for the whole galaxy to see. They laughed as our children burned alive. They called us vermin." She turned back to her console. "They wanted to teach us a lesson about power. We learned it. Now it's our turn to teach." The assistant didn't say another word. Back on Forge Station 7, a message came through for Yuki from High Command. She read it 3 times, just to be sure. Then, she let a small, tight smile touch her lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting 5 long years for this exact moment. The message was just 2 words. It begins. 3 weeks later, a Korath mining outpost on the fringe of conquered space noticed something odd. Their long-range sensors were lighting up with thousands of contacts dropping out of slipspace. The officer on duty stared at his screen. "What in the stars is this?" he grumbled. "We don't have any scheduled arrivals." He tried to get an ID on the ships. The computer just spat back an error. Unknown configuration, unknown origin, unknown everything. "Send a priority message to command," the officer snapped. "Tell them we've got unidentified ships closing in, thousands of them." The communications tech frantically typed at his console. He looked up, his face pale with confusion. "Sir, our comms are jammed, completely." For the first time in his 30-year career, the officer felt a cold sliver of fear. Korath did not feel fear. Korath caused fear. But the sight of those silent ships moving in perfect, silent formation made his scales prickle. "Battle stations!" he roared. "All weapons online!" It was a useless gesture. The outpost had 12 patrol ships and a few defense platforms. The fleet approaching them was in the thousands. But Korath did not run. Korath would fight to the last. They didn't have to wait long. The first human ships slid into visual range. They were black, like the empty void itself. They flew no flags. They sent no demands. They just kept coming, wrapped in a terrifying silence. Then, a voice echoed through every speaker on the outpost. It was a human voice, a woman's voice, perfectly calm. And it was reading names. Elena Vasquez, David Chen, May Tanaka, Sarah Chen, Marcus Webb Jr., Yuki's beloved, James Morrison, Anna Rodriguez, Tommy Anderson, age 7. The list of names went on and on. 2,000 names. The 2,000 human beings who had died 5 years ago, in this very sector of space. The Korath officer listened, a dawning horror creeping into his mind. He didn't understand why they were reading names. He had no idea this was a human ritual now, to recite the names of their dead before every battle. All he knew was that this woman's voice was the coldest, most final thing he had ever heard. When the last name was spoken, the voice stopped. And then the human fleet opened fire. The outpost survived for 4 minutes. The 12 patrol ships managed to last 6. When the storm passed, there was nothing left but shattered metal and the cold, silent dark. In her private quarters, aboard the UES Remember, Yuki Tanaka switched off the recording of the names. She had recited every single one from memory. She would recite them again before the next battle, and the one after that, until there were no enemies left to hear them. "Commander," Park's voice came over the intercom, "the outpost is gone. No survivors. They never even got a distress call out." "Good," Yuki replied. "Proceed to the next target." "Yes, Commander, and—" "Commander, the crew wanted me to pass something along." "What is it?" "They said May would be proud." Yuki squeezed her eyes shut as a single tear traced a path down her cheek. But when she opened them again, they were as dry and hard as diamond. "No," she whispered to the empty room. "May would be horrified. But May is dead, and I have a job to do." The Nemesis fleet pushed deeper into conquered space. Behind them, they left only silence and ash, and ahead of them, the elder races lived on in blissful ignorance, completely unaware that their executioners had finally arrived. It all started with a lie. In the Grand Council chamber, some low-level official mumbled about a communications glitch on the frontier. 3 outposts gone dark. Nothing to worry about, he assured them. The Supreme Hierarch wasn't even listening. He was too busy planning a party, a grand celebration for the day he shattered the humans' olive branch and put the vermin back in their place. He was daydreaming about which exotic species he'd parade in shimmering cages of light. He had no idea the cages were about to be shattered. He had no idea the vermin had spent 5 years forging nightmares in the dark. And he had no idea the silence from the frontier wasn't a glitch. It was the countdown. The storm broke everywhere at once. Over 47 Korath worlds, human fleets tore through the fabric of space, and they didn't come to talk. There were no demands, no calls for surrender, no negotiations, just fire. From the bridge of his flagship, High Commander Vreth, the most celebrated warrior in the history of the Korath, a man who had conquered worlds and bathed in the blood of 100 species, watched his empire burn. He had never known defeat. He was about to get a crash course. "How?" he bellowed, his voice rattling the deck plates. "How is this possible? They're primitives." His tactical officer, a young Korath whose voice trembled, replied, "Sir, they're weapons. They're unlike anything we've ever seen. Our shields are useless. Our armor might as well be paper," he stammered. "They're slicing through our battle groups like they aren't even there." Vreth watched another of his dreadnoughts vanish, in a silent, blossoming flower of fire on the main view screen. The human ships moved with a terrifying, perfect harmony, wasting nothing. Every shot was a kill. This wasn't a battle. It was an extermination. "What do they want?" Vreth roared. "Send a message. Ask for their terms." The message was sent. A reply came back almost instantly. Just 4 words. "We want you gone." Vreth stared, utterly baffled. Gone? What did that mean? Retreat? Surrender? The real answer was already arriving in waves of fire and death on Korath Prime, their home world. Civilians on the capital world stared up at the sky, confused. Beautiful new stars were popping into existence in the upper atmosphere, twinkling like jewels. They didn't know each new light was one of their warships dying. They didn't know the human fleet had already smashed through every line of defense. They didn't know that in less than an hour, their entire world would cease to exist. On the bridge of the starship Remembrance, Commander Tanaka watched the orbital bombardment begin. Her face was a mask of stone, her voice perfectly level as she gave the orders. But deep inside, a part of her was screaming. She was about to extinguish billions of lives, men, women, children. Most of them had never even heard of the olive branch. Most had never hurt a human. They were innocent. But their council had murdered innocent humans. Their council had slaughtered children, then laughed and called humanity vermin. And the Korath, they happily provided the warships that did the killing. "Open fire!" Tanaka commanded, her voice cutting through the silence. "All batteries, maximum yield." The Remembrance fired. Around it, the entire human fleet unleashed hell. Weapons of unimaginable power rained down on Korath Prime. The planet's cities became seas of glass. Its oceans boiled into steam. Its mountains were ground to dust. In 16 hours, 3 billion Korath died. Tanaka stood at her viewport and watched the planet die, refusing to look away. She owed the dead that much respect. She owed it to herself. If she was going to be a monster, she wouldn't pretend to be anything else. "Commander," her lieutenant, Park, said softly, "you should get some rest." "No." Tanaka's voice was a ghost of a whisper. "I will watch. I will remember. Every single life we take, I will carry it. That's the price. The council killed our people and never lost a night's sleep. They felt nothing." "Yes, ma'am. And we will not become them." Tanaka finally turned, her eyes bloodshot but bone dry. "We will feel every single death. We will carry every sin. And we will never, ever lie to ourselves about what this is. What is it, Commander? Murder, she said, without hesitation. Necessary murder, but murder all the same. The fleet moved on, leaving the dead world of Korath Prime behind them, a warning written in fire for the entire galaxy to read. And in the council chamber, the hierarch was finally beginning to understand. The reports were a tidal wave of horror from every corner of conquered space. Korath worlds vaporized. Korath fleets annihilated. 3 billion dead in a single day, and the human fleets were just getting started. This is impossible, the hierarch hissed, his crystalline body flickering with panic. The humans were nothing. Broken primitives. How? They had 5 years, the Nethys observer said, its shadowy form rippling with what looked an awful lot like fear. 5 years to plan. 5 years to build. 5 years to turn their grief into a weapon. We should have been watching them. We didn't think they were worth watching, the hierarch shot back. We thought they were vermin. The observer's voice was laced with acid. We were wrong. A hologram of the Korath High Commander flickered to life. His scales were ashen, his eyes wide with terror. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship was engulfed in flames. "Help us," he pleaded. "Send reinforcements. Send anything. They're everywhere. They're destroying everything." "We're sending what we can," the hierarch said, trying to sound in control. "Hold your positions. Fight back." The commander let out a broken, unhinged laugh. "You don't get it. They aren't fighting a war. They're not trying to take territory or resources. They're trying to erase us. Every last one of us. Every Korath in existence." The laugh turned into a sob. "This isn't war. It's genocide." The transmission ended as his flagship exploded behind him. The council chamber was plunged into a stunned, terrifying silence. For the first time in 10,000 years, they felt fear. True, primal fear. The kind of fear they'd inflicted on countless worlds, but had never imagined they'd feel themselves. "We must unite," the Meldari overseer declared. "Combine all our fleets, all our armies. Together we can crush them." "Can we?" The observer's voice was a chilling whisper. "Look at what they did to the Korath. The Korath lived and breathed for war, and the humans wiped them out in a matter of days." "The humans are few, we are many," the overseer argued. "They were building for 5 years," the observer repeated. 5 years, while we threw parties and congratulated ourselves for teaching them a lesson. The observer's shadowy arms spread wide. What other surprises did they build in those 5 years? What other nightmares are waiting for us in the dark? No one had an answer. Miles and miles away, General Marcus Webb, now 60 years old with hair as white as bone, guided his fleet toward Vethrani space. His face was a roadmap of a grief that would never fade. His daughter, Elena, had been the ambassador on the olive branch. She was the one who believed in peace, the one who extended a hand in friendship. The Vethrani hierarch had ordered her execution and called her an insect. He had laughed while he did it. The general hadn't heard him laugh in 5 years. "Sir," his aide interrupted, "we're intercepting a message. A Vethrani diplomat, name of Silith Ka, is requesting to speak with you." Webb raised a single eyebrow. "A diplomat? Funny, now they want to talk." "She says she wants to negotiate a surrender, sir." Webb was silent for a long moment. Then, "Put her through." A crystalline alien appeared on the screen. She was young, her form still bright and flawless. Her eyes held none of the usual Vethrani arrogance. They held fear, and something that looked a lot like shame. "General Webb," she began, "I am Selith Ka. I speak for those of my people who never supported the destruction of your ship. We were never consulted. We had no say in the hierarch's decision. And yet, your people held parades to celebrate the slaughter," Webb said, his voice dangerously calm. "I've seen the recordings, the displays of our dead, put up like hunting trophies." Silith flinched. "Not all of us celebrated. Some of us mourned. Some of us knew what the hierarch did was a monstrous crime." She leaned closer to the camera. "Please, there has to be a way to end this. Not all Vethrani are guilty. Not all of us deserve to die." Webb just looked at her. He thought of his daughter. He thought of her bright smile, of the last message she ever sent him. "Don't worry, Dad. Everything is going to be fine. We're going to make history." She did make history, just not the kind she dreamed of. "Tell me, diplomat," Webb said softly, "were there innocents on the olive branch?" Selith Ka's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Were there children, families, people who had never raised a hand against anyone in their lives?" "Yes," she finally whispered. "Yes, there were." "And did your hierarch spare them? Did he show mercy to a single innocent soul?" "No." "Then you have your answer." Webb leaned back in his chair. "We don't want your surrender. We don't want your apologies. And we don't want your excuses." His voice turned to steel. "We want you gone." "General, please." "You asked if there's a way to end this." Webb cut her off. "There is. This ends when the last Vethrani draws their last breath. This ends when the council that murdered our people is nothing but a bad memory. This ends," he said, rising from his chair, "when the entire galaxy understands that humanity will never, ever forget what you did to us." He stood and looked down at her. "Goodbye, Selith Ka. I suggest you spend what little time you have left with the people you love." The transmission cut out. Alone in her chambers, Selith Ka wept, crystal tears falling and shattering on the deck. She had tried. She had hoped, prayed, that somewhere inside the humans there was still a spark of mercy. But she had seen it in General Webb's eyes. It wasn't rage. It was something far colder, far more terrifying. It was purpose. In the fires of the olive branch, humanity had lost everything. And in the ashes, they had found a new reason to exist: extinction. Across the vastness of human-controlled space, the war machine churned without pause. New ships slid from orbital factories every single hour. Legions of soldiers drilled on dusty planets every day. Scientists unveiled deadlier weapons every week. This engine of vengeance was relentless. But a quiet unease was growing in the ranks. Inside a dimly lit bar on Titan, two soldiers nursed their drinks. One was a grizzled veteran who'd seen the first attacks. The other was a fresh-faced kid, barely out of basic training. "Are we doing the right thing?" the kid finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. "All this, we're wiping out billions, entire species." The old soldier took a slow sip. "You think I'm fighting for revenge? Or for that ship they destroyed, the Olive Branch?" "No." The veteran set his glass down with a heavy thud. "I fight because I know that if we don't end this, they will come back for us. It might not be tomorrow or even in our lifetime, but one day they'll decide to finish what they started. They'll burn our worlds and murder our children, calling us pests while they do it." He locked eyes with the young soldier. "I fight so my grandchildren will never have to." "But the innocents," the kid pressed. "The council murdered our civilians and didn't lose a wink of sleep. They felt nothing." The veteran's voice turned to steel. "I feel everything. Every single death is a weight on my soul. But I carry that weight, because the only other choice is our extinction." He pushed himself to his feet. "War isn't about being right. It's about surviving. And humanity will survive, no matter what it costs." The young soldier sat there for a long time after the veteran was gone. He thought about those words. He thought about the olive branch. He thought about the billions dying light years away in conquered space. Then, with a newfound resolve, he stood up, straightened his uniform, and headed back to his ship. The war raged on, and humanity kept winning. The galaxy had always understood fear. The smaller species feared the council. The weak feared the strong. Fear was the bedrock of the Concord's empire. For 10,000 years, the elder races had been the ones causing that fear. Now, they were finally learning what it felt like to be on the other side. The human fleet had just annihilated the Korath. 300 billion souls across 47 worlds, gone in less than a month. The very species that had been the Council's military arm for millennia was simply erased from the cosmos, and the humans hadn't even paused to catch their breath. The surviving Council races scrambled to gather their fleets. The Thrani, the Nethys, the Meldari, the Threll, the Dari, and the Hollow Ones, 6 species that had reigned for 10,000 years, were now huddled together, trembling. "We have to coordinate our fleets," the Meldari overseer insisted. "The humans are strong, but they are just one species. If we stand together, the Korath stood together." The Nethys observer cut in, its voice a dry rustle. "They had the biggest military in the galaxy. The humans shattered them like glass." "The Korath were arrogant," the Meldari shot back. "They fought as individuals, not as one unified force. And you think we'll fare any better?" The observer's shadowy form seemed to ripple with bitter laughter. "We've spent 10,000 years backstabbing and plotting against one another. We've sabotaged, stolen from, and betrayed each other at every turn. We've never once trusted each other." It spread its wispy limbs. "And now you expect us to link arms against an enemy that has already proven it can wipe us out?" The hierarch slammed a crystalline fist on the table. "Enough! We are the elder races. We ruled this galaxy when those vermin were still hiding in caves. We will not hide. We will not surrender. We will fight, and we will win." But his words echoed in the silent chamber, empty and frail. Everyone in that room knew the truth, but nobody dared to say it. What else was there to do? Miles away, under the shadow of a human battle fleet, a very different meeting was happening. The Drexi were a small species, conquered by the Council 1,000 years ago. Their planet was stripped bare, their people forced into servitude. For generations, they had served the elder races with a silent, bitter hatred, praying for a day of reckoning that never seemed to come. Until now. Ambassador Drexi Kell stood before Commander Tanaka on the bridge of the warship. "Remember." He was a tiny creature with 4 arms and huge, dark, liquid eyes. A small device translated his species' clicks and whistles into perfect English. "We want to help you," he chirped. The Drexi have suffered under council tyranny for a millennium. We have information, hidden bases, fleet movements, weaknesses in their defenses. We offer you everything." Tanaka eyed him coolly. "Why should I trust you?" "Because we hate them just as much as you do." Drexi Kell's large eyes shimmered with an ancient pain. "My grandmother was taken as a slave when she was just 7 years old. She worked in the Vithrani crystal mines, her hands bleeding every single day, until she died in those tunnels at the age of 30. My own mother never saw a free sky. I was born in a cage." He straightened his small frame with immense dignity. "We have dreamed of this day for 1,000 years. We never believed it would actually happen. But you have made the impossible real." Commander Tanaka was silent for a long moment, studying the small ambassador. Then she gave a single, sharp nod. "We accept your help. But you need to understand something. We are not liberators. We are not here to save the galaxy. We are here for one reason, and one reason only." "We understand," Drexi Kell said softly. "You are here for revenge. We don't blame you. We only ask that when the council is broken, you remember that others suffered under their heel. Others who deserve a chance to live in the light." Tanaka considered this. "If we win, the council will be dust. What comes after is not our problem." She paused. "But we will not target those who never harmed us. The innocent have nothing to fear from humanity." Drexi Kell bowed low. "That is more than the council ever offered us." And the Drexi were just the first. Soon came the unnamed, a race so utterly crushed they'd forgotten their own history. The hollow folk, beings of living glass, hunted nearly to extinction for their beautiful bodies. The broken, the forgotten, the lost, every species the council had stepped on to build their empire. They came offering intelligence, resources, and their own deep-seated hatred. And humanity welcomed them all. The war was no longer just about humanity versus the galaxy. It was the oppressed rising against the oppressors, the weak against the mighty, the forgotten against those who had tried to erase them. And the oppressors were starting to understand just how many enemies they had made over the millennia. On Vithros Prime, the Vithrani homeworld, civilians gazed at the sky with a creeping dread. The news of the Korath's total destruction had arrived. Rumors spread of unstoppable human warships. Whispers circulated about a strange species that chanted the names of their dead before every single battle. And then the broadcasts started. Human ships materialized in high orbit, but they didn't fire. Instead, they began transmitting a single message on every frequency. Every screen on the planet flickered to life, showing the same thing: human history. The Vithrani watched, frozen in horror, as images of humanity's own brutal wars flashed before them. 2 world wars, millions dead, atomic fire turning cities into graveyards, genocide, massacres, brother killing brother. It was a history of species-wide violence on a scale the Vithrani couldn't even begin to process. A calm, measured, terrifying human voice narrated the images. "This is what we do to our own kind, to those we love. We have slaughtered each other over imaginary lines on maps, over words in books, over differences so tiny an outsider couldn't even see them." The voice paused, letting the horror sink in. "Now, imagine what we are going to do to you. You, who murdered our children. You, who laughed as we pleaded for mercy. You, who called us vermin. The images on the screen shifted. Now they showed the olive branch, the peaceful exploration ship. Happy families, children playing in a park on Deck 12. "This is what you destroyed," the voice said, its calmness replaced by a cold fury. "This is what you took from us, and this is why we have come for you." The broadcast ended, and the human ships opened fire. In a hidden fortress, the council hierarch watched the destruction of his homeworld in utter disbelief. Crystalline tears streamed down his face, shattering like tiny diamonds on the cold floor. His people, his civilization, everything was burning, and he was powerless to stop it. "How did we not see this?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "How could we not know what they were?" The Nethe's observer stood beside him, its shadow form faded and weary. "Oh, we saw exactly what they were. We saw a savage species that had nearly driven itself to extinction multiple times. We saw a species capable of unimaginable cruelty." It paused. "We just made one fatal mistake. We assumed their violence was a weakness. We never for a second considered it might be their greatest strength." "A strength," the hierarch choked out. "They have spent their entire existence at war with their planet, with each other, with the very concept of extinction. They have been forged in fire since the day they were born," the observer said, its voice holding a strange note of admiration. "We thought we were superior because we had found peace, but our peace was a lie, built on domination and crushing any potential rival. We never had to truly fight to survive, not like them." The hierarch could only stare at the screen showing his dying world. "So they are better warriors." "No," the observer corrected softly. "They are not better warriors. They are simply more willing to pay the price of victory." It gestured a shadowy limb at the horrific images. "They are turning your world to ash, and they know this act will stain their souls forever. They know they are becoming monsters, and they are doing it anyway, because the alternative is something they simply will not accept." "What alternative?" the hierarch asked, his hope flickering. "Letting us live." And in that moment, the hierarch finally understood. The humans weren't fighting for land, or resources, or even just for revenge. They were fighting because the Council had taught them the galaxy's most brutal lesson. The weak are meat, and the strong do the eating. The weak are exterminated and forgotten. The weak are called vermin. And humanity had sworn they would never be weak again. In orbit above Vithros Prime, Commander Tanaka watched the planet burn. Another world burned, just like Korath Prime. Cities turned to glass and ash. Millions screamed and then went silent, but the human fleet kept firing. The young diplomat, Selith Ka, had tried to reach Commander Tanaka again, her voice pleading for the children, for the innocents who never supported the hierarch's madness. Tanaka had listened, patiently. Then she asked one simple question. "Did your hierarchs spare our children?" Selith Ka fell silent. There was no answer, because the answer was no. The Council had slaughtered every soul on the olive branch. Men, women, children, young and old, the guilty and the innocent alike. They drew no lines. So humanity decided it wouldn't either. General Webb's voice crackled through the comms. "Commander Tanaka, we've found it. The Council's fortress station. 3 of the 7 hierarchs are confirmed on board. Webb continued, including the Vithroni leader, who gave the order to destroy the olive branch. Tanaka turned away from the sight of the burning planet. Her face was an emotionless mask. "Set a course," she said. Her XO nodded. "The fleet is ready. This will be the final battle." Tanaka's voice was low, but it cut through the hum of the bridge. "No, this will be the final execution. The battle was over the moment they fired on a ship named for peace. They just don't know they're dead yet." She scanned the faces of her crew. Their eyes were old, tired. They'd seen too much, done too much. It was a weight they would all carry for the rest of their lives, but they'd carry it as one. "All hands," Tanaka's voice echoed through the ship. "We are proceeding to our final target, the Council's hidden fortress," she continued. "The architects of our extinction are waiting there." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I know what we have done. I know what we have become. I am sure some of you are asking yourselves if we've gone too far." The ship was dead quiet. Every soul was listening. "We have. We crossed that line when we decided that their extinction was the only way for us to survive. We will never be the people we were before the olive branch. We'll never be innocent again. But we will be alive. Our children will live. Our species will go on, and no one ever again will have the chance to call us vermin." She stood taller. "Battle stations. Today, we finish this." The Nemesis fleet pivoted as one, a great spear of vengeance aimed at the heart of the Council. The reckoning had come. For 10,000 years, the Council's fortress had remained a secret. It drifted inside a nebula of deep purple and shimmering gold, wrapped in layers of defenses that had never once been fired in anger. The elder races who built it thought it was invincible, certain no enemy could ever find it. They were wrong. The human fleet dropped out of slipspace in perfect, terrifying formation. 700 capital ships and 12,000 support vessels, the full might of a species that had spent 5 bitter years preparing for this single moment. All the Council had left was a shadow of their former power, the broken remnants of 6 fleets pulled from every corner of the galaxy. Their ships were marvels of crystal, shadow, and living metal, thousands of ships, crewed by beings who knew deep down that this was a fight for their very existence. On paper, it should have been an even fight. The Council had desperation on their side, but the humans had something far more powerful. They had names. Before a single weapon was fired, Commander Tanaka opened a channel to every ship in the human fleet. Her voice, calm and steady, began to read. Elena Vasquez, David Chen, Maya Tanaka, Sarah Chen, James Morrison, Anna Rodriguez, Tommy Anderson, age 7, Rebecca Park, age 4. The list went on. 2,000 names. 2,000 human beings who died right here, in this cold stretch of space. They were mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, scientists and diplomats. They were children who never got the chance to live. The Council fleet listened, baffled. They couldn't understand. Why were the humans wasting time with words? They didn't realize that, for humanity, these words were the only reason to fight. When the final name was read, Tanaka's voice turned to steel. "Open fire." The battle that followed was nothing like the slaughters before. This time, the Council fought with the fury of a cornered animal. Their ships were strong, their crews desperate. Human vessels bloomed into fireballs across the darkness. Human soldiers died by the thousands. Vengeance was a debt being paid in blood, but paying in blood was a price humanity had been forced to pay for its entire history. The battleship, Remember, pushed through the chaos. Sister ships flanked it, trying to draw fire. "Damage reports," Tanaka yelled. Lieutenant Park's voice was strained. "Fires on 3 decks. Shields are failing. We have a hull breach." Then Commander Park spoke up. "Ma'am, we're taking too much fire. We have to pull back." Tanaka stared at the view screen. The fortress was right there, shielded by the last, best ships of the Council fleet. So close. "Negative," she said. "All remaining power to the forward shields. Prepare for ramming speed." "Commander, that's suicide." "That's the job," Tanaka shot back, turning to her crew. "I am not ordering anyone to stay. If you want to get to the escape pods, you go now." Not a single person moved. A young ensign, barely out of the academy, looked at her and said, "Commander, we started this together. We're going to finish it together." Tanaka felt a sting in her eyes and blinked it away. "Then let's finish it." The Remember surged forward. Around it, the human fleet tightened its formation, becoming a single, massive battering ram of steel and sheer will. Council ships desperately tried to stop them. Some did. More human ships exploded. More lives were snuffed out. But the wedge never stopped. The Remember slammed into the fortress station's shields at impossible speed. The impact was catastrophic. The ship screamed and buckled. Entire decks collapsed, and hundreds of her crew died in a flash. But the shields flickered, overloaded, and failed. And through the hole torn by the Remember, the rest of the human fleet poured in. General Webb led the Marine assault team. His shuttle smashed through the fortress's hull, disgorging 50 soldiers deep inside enemy territory. They fought through hallways of glowing crystal and shifting shadows, cutting down everything that moved. In the first minute of the fight, a Vithroni energy blade took Webb's left arm. He didn't even slow down. He just wrapped the stump in bandages and kept pushing forward. The physical pain was nothing, a dull ache compared to the agony he'd felt watching his daughter's life wink out. "General," his sergeant yelled, "we've got them. Council chamber, dead ahead. 3 hierarchs inside." Webb grunted. "Then that's where we're going." They tore through the final line of defenders. Vithroni royal warriors, Neph assassins, the elite guard of every elder race still breathing. They all died. The doors to the council chamber were 3 meters tall and made of solid metal 1/2 meter thick. Webb slapped a shaped charge on them and blew them inward. Inside, 3 figures waited. In the center stood the Vithroni hierarch, his crystalline body dim, cracked with age and now with fear. Next to him, the Neph observer's shadowy form quivered. Cowering behind them was the Meldari overseer, the last of the council. "General Webb," the hierarch said, his voice still dripping with an arrogance he no longer had the right to feel. "You have won. We acknowledge your victory. Now, let us discuss the terms of our surrender." Webb advanced slowly, his soldiers fanning out behind him, every rifle aimed. The soft hum of his prosthetic arm was the only sound. "Terms?" he repeated. "Yes, surrender terms. Reparations. Whatever you wish," the hierarch said, holding out a crystalline hand. "We can offer you territory, technology, even slaves from the lesser species. Anything you want." Webb stopped just a few feet away and activated a device on his wrist. A shimmering hologram of a starship, the Olive Branch, materialized in the air between them. "Do you remember this ship?" Webb asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The hierarch glanced at it. "The human vessel? Yes. I gave the order for its destruction. Why? Because your species was becoming a nuisance. You were expanding too fast. Other races were beginning to listen to you, the hierarch continued. I had to send a message. A message? Webb's voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. You killed 2,000 unarmed civilians. You murdered children. And to you, that was just a message? You have to understand our perspective. Oh, I understand perfectly, Webb said, and the hologram changed. Now, it showed the final, horrifying moments of the olive branch. Escape pods being targeted and destroyed. Bodies tumbling into the void. The final silent flash of the ship exploding. My daughter was on that ship, Webb said. Her name was Elena. She was 32 years old. She believed in peace. She believed that if we just reached out our hands, other species would take them in friendship. He paused. She was wrong. The hierarch finally took a step back. True terror now etched across his crystal face. General, please, he stammered. I admit it was a mistake, a terrible mistake, but surely we can move past this. Did Elena get to move past it? Webb asked. Did the children on that ship get to beg for their lives? No, so you don't get to either. Webb raised his rifle. The hierarch threw his hands up in a pathetic, useless gesture. Wait, he cried. We can be useful to you. We have knowledge, technology. We have ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years. We can help you rule it. Webb hesitated. For just a second, something flickered in his eyes. Something human. Pity, maybe, or doubt. Then he remembered his daughter's smile from her last message. He remembered the recordings of the council celebrating the massacre, laughing as they displayed human remains like hunting trophies. We don't want to rule the galaxy, Webb said, his voice cold as the grave. We just want you out of it. He fired. The hierarch's crystalline body exploded into 1,000,000 shards. The Neph observer tried to dissolve into the shadows, but was stitched to the wall by a dozen marine rifles. The Meldari overseer dropped to his knees and begged, and was executed right where he knelt. In less than a minute, it was over. The council that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years ended in a quiet room, filled with human soldiers and the faint smell of burning crystal. Imagine being told your people are nothing more than vermin. That's what the all-powerful Concord Council called humanity. And to prove their point, they blew up our peace offering, a ship named the Olive Branch, with 2,000 souls on board. They thought we would break. They thought we would scatter. They made a fatal miscalculation. If you want to know how a species with everything to lose took on a galactic empire, you need to hear this. General Marcus Webb stood on the bridge of the enemy's command station, surrounded by silence where there had been screams. He felt a profound emptiness, not victory. He keyed his comm, and his voice crackled across the galaxy. This is a message for every surviving Concord force and for anyone listening. The Concord Council is no more. The hierarchs are gone. Their entire empire will now serve as a warning, not a legacy. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. To every species they crushed under their heel. To everyone they enslaved and brutalized. You are now free. But understand this. Humanity didn't do this because we're monsters. We did this because we refuse to be prey. His voice turned to steel. Cross us, and we will wipe you from the stars. Stand with us, and we will defend you to our last breath. The choice was always yours. Miles away, in the wreckage of her ship, Commander Tanaka smiled as the message ended. The crash had shattered her body, but not her spirit. "We did it, May," she whispered to a faded picture on her console. "Promise kept." She closed her eyes one last time. 50 years passed. The galaxy was reborn. In place of the tyrannical council, a new galactic alliance was formed, built on equality and respect. And humanity? They were members, but when offered the leadership, they did something no one expected. They refused. They had no interest in becoming the very thing they had fought to destroy. They chose to be partners, not masters. Where the olive branch had once been, a silent memorial now drifted. It was a simple, elegant spire of black stone, engraved with 2,000 names. Every day, ships from 100 different species would pass by, leaving small tokens, flowers, crystals, shimmering lights. A young girl walked along its observation deck. She was a Vithrani, one of the few survivors of the old ruling race. Her crystalline body sparkled, a stark contrast to the dark history of her people. After the war, she'd been adopted by human parents, who taught her to love both her heritage and her new family. They had named her Hope. As she gently placed a bouquet of real earth flowers at the monument's base, she noticed an old man watching her. He was ancient, with snow-white hair and a mechanical arm that was dull with age, but his eyes were still piercing, filled with memories that never slept. It was Marcus Webb. He came here every year, on the exact same day, to read every name and remember every face. "Why do you always come here?" Hope asked in her soft, chiming voice. Webb looked down at this child, the living legacy of his greatest enemy, a symbol of everything he had both saved and destroyed. "To remember," he said, his voice raspy with age, "to remember what they forced us to become." Hope tilted her head. "What did you become?" Webb was quiet for a long moment, lost in the past. "We became a nightmare," he finally said. "A necessary, terrible nightmare. Something I pray we never have to be again. They dismissed us as pests. They said we were an infestation that needed to be cleansed. So, we showed them what happens when the pests decide to fight back." Hope nodded. She had studied the histories. She knew the atrocities the Council had committed, and she knew the terrifying, swift justice humanity had delivered in return. She was too young to hold that kind of anger. "Do you regret it?" she asked. Webb thought about it. "I regret that we had to do it. I regret what it cost us, our innocence, the part of ourselves that believed we were purely good." He sighed. "But I don't regret that my grandchildren can sleep soundly at night. I don't regret that no one will ever again slaughter human children just to send a message. So, was it worth it? I don't know." He gave a sad smile. "I don't know if any prize is worth that price, but it's done. And now, all of us, from humans to Vithrani, have to live with the galaxy we made." Hope reached out and placed her small crystalline hand on the cool stone. Her fingers traced the names carved there. Elena Vasquez, May Tanaka, Tommy Anderson, age 7. "I'll remember," she promised quietly. "I'll make sure my children, and their children, remember everything that happened, the good and the bad." Webb nodded slowly. "That's all anyone can ask." The old soldier and the young alien stood there together, two sides of a painful history, sharing a quiet hope for the future. Around them, the endless stars burned on, silent witnesses to it all. They had seen empires crumble to dust. They had watched humanity claw its way from victim to predator, and finally find its way back to peace. And the stars would continue to watch, because that is what stars do. They remember, long after everyone else has forgotten. In the end, that was the only memorial that truly mattered. Not the stone, not the names, but the story that lived on, a lesson whispered on the starlight for all time. The Concord Council thought destroying the olive branch was an ending. Instead, it was the beginning of theirs.